Get out the insurance cards, get out the copays. The office is open, my friends. Brought to you by drroto.com.
Good evening, everybody. It is another episode of Esports with Emrick. We are here to talk about the LPL opening day. It's a super exciting time of the year. If you're like me, your NFL lineups might have had Taysom Hill, maybe even had Vaughn in the Bell touchdown, and Taysom Hill going out doesn't really work well. So it's time to move over and shift our focus to the LPL, which starts at 4 a.m. Eastern. It's a 2-game slate, not the most exciting, but we do have some contests. We do have what I think is a decent 2-game slate in the sense that while we have some big favorites, and we certainly do have big favorites, I think both of the dogs are kind of live and for different reasons. So kind of let's go ahead and let's get into that. Let me kind of share my screen here and take a look at what we've got going on. Let's see. Let's share this screen. Share that. Boom. And we probably should have thought about this ahead of time. There we go. So, boom. All right. So first and foremost, let's talk about the 2 games that we have. The opening game that we have is going to be OMG versus Thunder Talk TT Gaming. This is a game that we have a huge favorite here in OMG, playing against a kind of a new lineup in TT. They put together wholesale changes just based off of this lineup not being very good last year. One of the bottom of the barrel teams, OMG, really wasn't good in spring. With the addition of Abel and Cream, really kind of was able to, no pun intended, get some better results. But I think, the fact that they're a minus 415 favorite right here, it just seems a little heavy-handed. When we go back and we take a look at what happened last year, not spring, but let's go into the summer. I'll make this a little bit bigger. I forget that this is harder to see on the screen. And we go look at this. Let's take a look at who OMG beat last year. They beat IG, who was having a down year. They beat JDG, who, that's a decent win, but we know in summer JDG had their struggles. So I'm not trying to take anything away from either of these wins. They were decent wins, but these were both teams that didn't make the playoffs. You had LGD, who was just absolutely terrible. Then when it came to teams that were good, like BLG, FPX, EDG, LNG, those were all losses. They lost to RA. They beat Rogue Warriors, and they had a great win against RNG. But when they won that game, I do believe that was kind of like the bounce back right after MSI, the hangover. Not trying to take that away from them. That was a good win. And then, of course, kind of that really epic series against WE. That was a back-and-forth series, and that was fun to watch. I remember it was I think the 2:00 game on a Saturday. But look, those were their 2 primary wins. Other than that, they beat TT, they beat Up. Those were in both games that you're not necessarily, super impressed with. And beyond that, also was able to beat Victory 5, who was not a good team either. So they ended up finishing 9-7. JDG, which is one of those all right wins, was a 7-9. LGD with a 7-9. They beat IG, that was 6-10. So again, why are we looking at this team as a minus 415 favorite? Well, I think a big part of it is going to be that this TT team is not very good in itself. And some of these guys we have seen play before. When we're talking about this TT team and who's going to be on here, they made some changes. New coming in from OMG. He's a solid top laner. He's nothing to get excited about. But then you have Frigid, Captain, Puff, and Southwind. So we've seen this bottom lane between Puff and Southwind before. Again, not necessarily anything that I'm getting excited about. Captain came up with all of this hype, but was able or unable to deliver on it last year and eventually got replaced. And we haven't really seen Frigid. So this lineup together, do I think OMG ends up winning this game? Absolutely. I probably do. lean that way. However, I think TT can take a game. They are minus 110 to take one of those games, and I've placed a wager on that. And I think there is an outside chance that they can win at plus 275. So, if you're betting on some of these long shots that these lines early in the season are inaccurate, they're heavily favored towards OMG and the hype that shouldn't necessarily be there, then I think you go ahead and you take a couple chances on TT, whether that be like a half unit, a quarter unit, something in that range. The other game that we have is a very similar type of situation where you have a very heavy favorite in RNG against a pretty much a new roster in FPX. Now, we've seen parts of this FPX roster before, and we've seen them together with Beishan. I don't know how to say the top laner's name, so I'm not going to try, but LWX, obviously a mainstay. This line at plus 145 has changed pretty drastically. So a lot of money has come in on the FPX side. This roster did look really good in Demacia Cup. Now, again, I'm not trying to insinuate that's a good indication of how these teams are going to perform, but they did take 5 or top esports to 5 games. They beat up and they beat them convincingly. So what we have seen of this roster, if even in a tournament that doesn't necessarily mean that much, has looked good. And if you remember to last season, when we saw RA at that point, Vici Gaming, performed very well in those off-season tournaments, it did translate into a much better spring and summer version of that team. So I think that there's a lot to be said about this FPX team if you want to take a bet and a wager on it. I think my unit size is about 100. What did I do? I had them at plus 210. So if they were at plus 210, they're now plus 145. A lot of people are feeling that same way. I don't think that there's any value on that plus 1.5 at minus 220 anymore. I think you kind of go one way or the other in terms of either FPX wins or RNG sweeps. That's where we're at from there. Now let's do this, with the esports plug taking kind of a step back to do other projects. There's a little bit of a void in terms of people that are going to be doing kind of content like this. And so I'm going to step in, I'm going to do some of this content. I'm going to try and deliver it as much as possible. Typically will not be covering 2-game slates. But look, this is the beginning of the season. It's the first slate. We're excited. We've waited a long time for this. I know I'm waking up at 4 a.m. my time to watch these games, even though it is a 2-game slate. And I'm sure many of you will be there with me. But let's take a look at this. These projections are not the projections that the esports department used to do. They are custom projections that I do myself. This is my first run at it, so I'm not going to sit here and try and bullshit you and tell you that these are fantastic projections. I think that they are, and I think that they're going to be pretty accurate. But I just don't have any way of back testing them. Now, also in regards to these particular teams, there's no way to back test them because these teams haven't played together. They're new. How are they going to play? How are they going to play in this meta? These are things that we are going to learn. And as time goes on, I think, if there are some inaccuracies and things that need to be tweaked in these projections, then, we're going to go ahead and be able to make those changes. But, just initially, when I was looking at the slate at first, I thought that we would have had a higher scoring, OMG. I thought they were going to be the highest scoring team on the slate, but it does, the projections really, that's cool. I didn't even realize that they had, okay. So the way that the projections look, they really like FPX. Now, again, this is kind of coming from Demacia a little bit. A lot of the numbers that I had to pull when these guys are playing together are there. So it is pretty heavy, but RNG was a team that died a lot when they lost last season. I think that that's going to continue and carry over, and FPX is able to go ahead and upset RNG. I think that they're going to be able to do so in a fashion that's going to make them far more optimal than either OMG or TT. So favoring both them in the top position. It likes Way a little bit more than Beishan here, and then certainly more than Akai and Frigid. In the mid position, Xiaohu, looks like he's going to be the highest scoring, followed by Gory and Cream. These guys are a little bit interchangeable. ADC really likes LWX and Abel. The projections are very low on Gala and Puff. And if you just look at the way that these guys played the last time that we've seen them, they were not those guys that got super involved. Now, part of this RNG, it is going to be interesting for me to see how this team adjusts to Yahoo moving back into the mid lane. I felt like a lot of the strength of this team that made them that elite level, not just a very good team, was the synergy between him and Wei playing through that top side, and then Cryan coming over to aid and acting as more of kind of a supportive mid laner. Is that going to change? I suspect it will. I think people are a little bit higher on Bin than I am personally. I think he's a great top laner, but I just don't know if they're going to have the same magic that they did last split. Now, also, as a result of them playing so heavily through the top lane, what is that, what are the repercussions on your bottom lane in those scenarios? Obviously, it was kill participation and kill share for Gala. We know that some of the champions that were more meta towards the end of the split last year, or the end of last year as a whole, weren't necessarily some of his stronger ones as they were kind of in spring. But also some of these TP changes are going to have some effects. I mean, is this going to put the top laners more at more kind of on an island up there? Is this going to hurt their kill participation? Are we going to see these guys dropping from this somewhere between mid 60s to 70s as a good one, and those good top lane kill participations moving more into what we view as mediocre or bad, closer to 55 or 60, because they're not going to be involved in any of those early skirmishes. They're just not going to have any ability or way to get into those fights until the 14-minute mark. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there was a change to the teleport summoner spell that just went into effect a week ago. This isn't something that we can look at any of these preseason tournaments. We can't look at the VCS. We can't look at anything for them that matter when it comes to pro play in terms of the ramifications that it's going to have. But basically, you can't utilize your TP to get anywhere except for on a tower for the first 14 minutes. You can't do it on an enemy's ward. You can't, or not on an enemy's ward, but an ally's ward or onto a minion, which was something that, top laners did quite a bit to come down into the bottom lane. There's a little skirmish, or vice versa. This really turns teleport into a very defensive spell at the beginning of the game. So we'll see what kind of effects that has. But nevertheless, let's take a look at a couple of things. If you are playing cash, I do think OMG and RNG, obviously with both pretty heavy odds, makes a ton of sense to put those two teams together. My projections are available to anybody for free. You can message me on Twitter or find me in the esports department Discord so I can send you the CSV. One of the things that I have done is I've made all of the team slots 20 points. I think it just kind of changes the dynamic for the optimals and doesn't necessarily set a precedent that I need this particular team slot because they're projected for 2 or more points than their the other team that we're looking at. So that may change, as there are teams that are very good at getting first tower, that are very good at getting first blood, I should say, and that really change that. And then also have a high, heavy dragon percentage. Those teams are going to have slight edges, but I'm not trying to be precise when it comes to the team slot. It's just kind of like a good, better, best type of situation. But nevertheless, so between those two teams, when we are looking at this, I like to set this for 90. You have kind of this mixture here with a Wei captain. You can't really do much with these two teams aside from playing either a top captain or a jungle captain. But I think this is kind of the way that I wanted. When this is actually a little bit small. So this is one that projects out really well here. When I was playing with it earlier, one of the things that I kind of liked, and I'm more likely to run in cash-related contests, would probably be switching cold here, and then possibly going with something like Bin there to do something like that. I think that that's something that you can do If you want it to be a little bit different off of the optimal, I'm not really sure which one of those I'm going to go with, because obviously this is an industry-wide projection that a lot of people have access to. So I don't know if that's the optimal that's popping in other people's. Somebody can tell me if it is, if it isn't. I know a lot of people are doing their own projections, and so they're going to differ from that standpoint. But if I am playing RNG, I absolutely want to get way in there. I think that he, as we've stated, is part of the team that is going to be the highest scoring of the two winners if RNG is the winner. And I do wonder how many people are going to go to OMG. There always seems to be a lot of hype behind OMG, and at times the ownership doesn't necessarily reflect it. It just feels like sometimes that's just in, my little echo chamber, I guess, at times. But a couple other lineups just to run through it. So that's probably a good place to start for cash. FPX, OMG. Projections really like an LWX captain with Cream and Abel. I think that this is going to be a super popular FPX OMG kind of combination, and it makes a ton of sense. Abel and LWX are both guys that do a ton of work for their teams and project out super high. I think LWX is the highest projected on the slate. So in a 2-0 win, he's going to absolutely crush, and so will Abel. And so getting them both in that lineup. Now in big field tournaments, to be a little bit different, I think one of the ways that you could go is go Abel here, go ADC, LWX, and you could do something like that. As if I had to put these two teams against each other, I think OMG is the more likely to 2-0, and these should all be 55, not 20. It's all the same. But yeah, so that's kind of the way that I would approach that. We've seen it a lot in these 2-game slates. We saw a ton of these VCS slates throughout its entire winter split were all 2-game slates, and as a result, we got really good at figuring out some of the weird things that we could do without getting too unoptimal. And going with this 3-4 type of setup is one of those things. The other thing is, look, if we are projecting FPX and RNG to be this high scoring, I think a one-off from the losing team is a very high probability of making it into a one-off optimal. So I think that's a route that you can take. The other kind of setup we have here with TT and RNG, just going with one dog instead of a double dog lineup, would be something like, again, RNG captains going with Frigid, Puff, getting Gala out of there. Obviously, he doesn't project nearly as well as the rest of his team. And then finally, if you are going double dog, I suspect that this is going to be an LWX captain with okay, so that's a really interesting kind of build right there. I wouldn't have thought of that, but you're getting a 4-3 with the team on the 4, still part of the captain with LWX. So those are a couple lineups. I'll probably be running those in a variety of different contests. Again, look, this is a 2-game slate. I will tell you this. Oh, you know why? That's why. Yeah, there. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. When it comes to 2-game slates, just try and cover as many bases as you can. If you are only playing 1 or 2 lineups, I think you're best suited to play one of the dogs, if not both of the dogs, especially in big field tournaments. Otherwise, there's going to be a ton of chops, and especially when you're playing OMG, RNG lineups, when it is limiting you to either a jungle captain, a top captain, a support captain, and it's really limiting the amount of different combinations that there are, you're more than likely going to see a pretty big chop, and that pretty big chop might not really make playing those tournaments worth it. But this was kind of a short video. It was meant to be, as these slates get longer and, into Wednesday and beyond, when we have 4 and 5 games, I'm going to spend a little bit more time. We'll talk more about a couple of the different combinations, focus on that cash game lineup. But until then, I'll see you guys at 4 a.m. and good luck to everybody.